Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at 3 games I've spent some time with over the last couple of days to give you some honest feedback on whether they're any good or not. In this video description there will be affiliate links to all the games featured today where you can save 10%. And starting this video today is by Grit Alone, which is claiming to be the new Dead Sapce of VR. But it's so far away from being anything like Dead Space in so many ways, apart from actually being set in space. It's not scary mainly due to the Rec Room style graphics and the terrible effects for pretty much everything, ranging from explosions, gunfire, sound clips, and the voice work can be painful to listen to. The plot at first, however, did keep me intrigued, and this kept me going for around the first hour. It has something to do with a sex cult and exploiting women, but it soon deviates all over the place, and after a while it felt pretty mediocre to play overall. The enemies are repetitive and boring, and by the 3rd level only one more different style of enemy was introduced and it was pretty laughable, and this led me to basically wanting to quit the game. The main gun you have has 2 firing modes which can be changed by holding the grip of the gun, and one is like a shotgun and one is like a rifle, and very rarely will you have to use the alternative rifle mode. You pretty much are safe just going around with the shotgun mode. But again, this just looks very underwhelming and more like a toy weapon. It's not terrible, but it's not a game I would recommend unless you're desperate for something to play, and if you haven't already checked out Cosmodread, that's the game I would recommend way more than this one. It's not that Cosmodread actually looks any better, in fact Cosmodread kind of looked pretty childish in some ways, especially the enemy types. But the gameplay, weapons and pull of escaping the ship makes it a great roguelike shooter and has tons of upgrades to unlock and has some jump scares. So by Grit Alone is a game that I would recommend you avoid, and instead, if you haven't played it, go for Cosmodread. Moving on, we have Ember Souls from the developers of Guardian's Frontline. You can tell some special attention has been given to Ember Souls, and it's a mix of nicely polished parts mixed in with some really rough edges, and unfortunately the really rough part is something that makes up a big part of the game, and that's the combat. But let me come back to that in a moment. The graphics regarding the environments can look really nice, as do the main weapons. Your armed gauntlets look brilliant, and the falcon that guides you through the game has some brilliant voice acting and looks very good too. The level design is okay from what I experienced, which is like 3 chapters, and definitely presents itself as a platformer. You can wall run and wall jump, scale walls, and use slow-mo by swinging from poles and chandeliers, and this can be a really nice experience. Pretty quickly you get access to some magic which you can use as like a forced push, or you can use it to grab certain parts of the world and pull yourself towards it. And at first I kind of found it pretty cool to be playing, but after a while I did start to struggle to enjoy myself. The combat, as I mentioned earlier, is really woeful and repetitive, and the biggest problem is it's very unchallenging. And some of the puzzles I just walked through instead of figuring out, which must be some sort of glitch. I've seen comparisons to Prince of Persia, and I can see why people have said this due to the environment and the fact you are playing a prince, and you do pretty cool stuff like grab hold of drapes and slide down them with like a ripping effect, but even this doesn't look that great. Overall, the more I played, the more I felt this game is very undercooked, and it definitely needs some more time before a consumer would purchase it. I have given actually a lot of this feedback directly to the developers at Gamescom, and even though that was a few months ago, it feels like nothing has really changed, and that's what I feel is important to tell the player. The sound effects are okay and a little bit funny, maybe that's on purpose, but overall in combination with the janky gameplay, boring combat and the laughable boss fights, it's just not something I could recommend to players right now. It's got potential, but it feels unfinished and definitely untested. And the last game is Underworld Overseer by the developer of Dead Sapce of VR. This one was absolutely brilliant once I understood the game mechanics, and it's cool to be the bad guys who are fighting the humans. It's pretty simple to start. You have to mine for gold, take over land, spawn miners, and then create training areas for warriors and mages and keep them all fed and give them somewhere to sleep. I love the way you can expand your control of the dungeon, but you also have to look after the heart of the dungeon, because if this falls to the humans, it's game over and it can happen really quickly. So resourcing and planning is key. You can fortify with traps and guard posts, and the waves of enemies turned out to be pretty challenging in the later levels, which was welcoming. And the more times you lose, the more you learn. And the final wave of enemies is normally accompanied by a tough boss, which so far has been like a big knight. And he takes quite a bit of damage to take down, especially when he's guarded by a wizard. The graphics are clean and the high frame rate and animations are really cool. The sound effects are great, and I can easily see myself putting hours into this. When you grow a huge army and you call in a raid, it reminded me of parts of Lord of the Rings, especially in the mine sections, where there's just tons of orcs and humans fighting, and there appears to be lots of levels laid out in like a mountain to conquer on the world map. This is one I would highly recommend. So I hope this video has helped you make a decision on whether to pick up any of these games. If you've played them, please let others know your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe for more VR content, and I'll see you on the next one.